My name is Silas Sterling. I am 62 years old, and the land beneath my feet, every acre of red Carolina soil, every oak that drinks from that river, every stone of that house, it all belongs to me now. Not because someone was kind, not because God finally looked down and took pity, but because a dying man, too cowardly to be decent in life, wrote my name in a document he never had the courage to sign in daylight. I was property for 20 years. I cooked their food, scrubbed their floors, and raised my sons in the dark corners of a house that refused to see me. And then, on one October morning, everything shifted, and I became the most dangerous woman in Charleston County, a woman with a piece of paper and nothing left to lose. If that hit you the way I think it did, stay with me, because what I'm about to tell you took me 40 years to be able to say out loud. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been told your name didn't matter, you need to hear the rest of this. Subscribe. Leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. It costs you nothing, and it means everything to my family. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Before I tell you what happened next, before I take you inside that room where the lawyer read the words that stopped Catherine Sterling's heart cold, I need you to understand something. There is a moment in every invisible person's life when the world finally sees them. Mine came at a cost I am still counting. I carried 3 sons with gray eyes that matched Silas Sterling's perfectly, and I kept that secret like a stone pressed against my chest for 2 decades. I watched, I waited, and I learned every crack in that house the way a prisoner learns their cell. If you have ever been told that you were nothing, that your name didn't matter, that your children had no future, then this story belongs to you too. Subscribe if you want to hear how the invisible woman became the one who held the deed. And please, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps my family keep the lights on and food on our table. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. Sterling oaks smelled like iron and sweetgrass. That is the first thing I want you to understand about that place. It had a smell that never left you, not even after you were gone. The red clay stuck to the soles of your feet and dried there like a second skin. The oak trees were massive, older than any of us, older than the cruelty that happened in their shade. In the mornings, before anyone in the main house stirred, the air carried the sound of the river moving slow and heavy through the low country. It was almost beautiful, if you could forget what it cost to stand there and breathe it in. The kitchen where I spent most of my hours was built separate from the main house. Stone floors, low ceiling, a fire that never fully went out, summer or winter. The heat in that room was something alive. It pressed against your face and chest like a hand that never let go. My days began before the sun. I would rise in the dark, dress in the dark, and walk across the yard while the dew was still heavy on the grass. By the time Catherine Sterling opened her eyes, her breakfast was already warm. By the time her children sat at that long dining table with its white linen cloth, I had already been working for 3 hours. I cooked, I cleaned, I carried. I mended clothes and polished silver and swept floors until my hands cracked and bled in the winter cold. I did all of this without being asked twice, because being asked twice meant consequences I could not afford. My sons, James, Thomas, and little Eli, slept in a small room behind the kitchen. I checked on them every time I passed, every single time. That was my routine. Work, check on my boys, work again, survive the day, begin again tomorrow. For 20 years, that was the full shape of my life inside Sterling Oaks. It was a Tuesday in October of 1862 when everything changed. I remember because the persimmons on the tree by the fence had just turned deep orange, and the air had that particular sharpness that comes right before the Carolina winter settles in. I was carrying a tray of broth to Silas Sterling's room. He had been bedridden for 11 days by then, his body finally surrendering to what his conscience had been fighting for years. The door was slightly open. Inside, a man I had never seen before sat beside the bed, dressed too finely for Charleston, holding a leather satchel across his knees. A northern man. I could tell by the cut of his coat and the way he held himself, straight-backed, uncomfortable in that house. Silas turned his head and looked at me, not through me the way he usually did, at me, directly. And in that look was something I had never seen on his face before in 20 years. It was not kindness. It was not love. It was the particular expression of a man who knows his time has run out and is desperately hoping that what he is about to do will be enough. He told me to set the tray down and stay. His voice was thin as paper. The man with the satchel, Mr. Miller, an attorney from Illinois, opened a document and began to read. I stood very still. I had trained myself over 20 years to keep my face smooth, unreadable, the way still water hides its depth. But inside, something was moving fast and dangerous. The document gave me a surname, Sterling. It gave my sons, James, Thomas, and Eli, the same name, and with it, legal recognition as heirs. It transferred land. It transferred a bank account in Chicago. And it named 39 other people on that plantation as recipients of their freedom, their dignity, and a formal written acknowledgement of the wrong done to them. I stood there listening to those words and felt something crack open inside my chest. Not relief, not gratitude, but a cold and clarifying fury. Because this man had waited until he was dying. He had waited until the very last possible moment to do what was right. And now he wanted me to receive it gracefully. I did not cry. I want you to know that. I did not thank him. Silas Sterling reached out his hand toward me, thin, spotted, trembling, and I looked at it for a long moment. Then I picked up the document instead. I held it against my chest like it was one of my boys when they were small. Mr. Miller explained that the papers were already filed in Illinois, that copies existed in 3 separate locations, that Catherine Sterling could contest but would not prevail. He said it with the calm precision of a man who had done this before, who believed in the law the way some people believe in God. When I finally walked out of that room, the air in the hallway felt different. The floorboards felt different under my feet. I had walked those same boards 10,000 times as property. I walked them now as something else entirely. Behind me, I could hear Silas Sterling coughing. He would be dead within the week. And the war he had just started? The one between me and Catherine Sterling was only beginning. Catherine Sterling found out on a Thursday. I know because I heard the sound of porcelain shattering against the parlor wall. A teacup, I believe, from the set her mother had brought from England. Then came the silence, which was worse than the sound. She appeared in the kitchen doorway 20 minutes later, dressed in black mourning clothes that she had put on before Silas had even drawn his last breath, her face arranged into something that was trying very hard to be composure. She looked at me the way a person looks at something that has no right to be standing where it is standing. She said, very quietly, that the document was a fabrication, that a dying man's confused mind could not be held to legal standard, that Mr. Miller was a northern agitator with no authority in South Carolina. I listened to every word she said. I kept my hands folded in front of me, and when she finished, I told her, just as quietly, that the papers were already filed in Illinois, that copies existed in Charleston, in Chicago, and with a pastor in Philadelphia. Her left eye twitched once. That was all. She turned and walked back down the hallway, and I knew then that the real danger was just beginning. That night, I sat with my boys in our small room behind the kitchen. James was 19, Thomas 17, and Eli had just turned 14. I looked at their faces in the lamplight, those gray eyes that Silas Sterling had never once publicly acknowledged, and I tried to find the words to explain what had happened. What I told them was this: we had been handed a door, but doors can be closed again by people with enough power and enough fury. I told them that Catherine Sterling would not accept this quietly. I told them that the document was real and legal and filed, but that a piece of paper means nothing if the people around you refuse to honor it and have weapons you do not. James looked at me with that steady, serious expression he had carried since he was small and asked me what we were going to do. I did not answer right away. I sat there in the dark, listening to the night sounds of Sterling oaks, the oak trees moving in the wind, the distant river, and I felt the full weight of what I was carrying. 43 lives, including my own 3 sons, all of it resting on my next decision. 3 days after Silas was buried, 2 men arrived on horseback before dawn. Confederate militia, not regular soldiers, but the kind of men who wore the cause like a costume and used it to settle personal grievances. They spoke to Catherine on the front porch for a long time. I watched from the kitchen window, my hands pressed flat against the cold stone sill. When they left, Catherine came to find me in the yard. She stood 6 feet away and told me she had a proposal. She said she would honor the freedom of my 3 sons, James, Thomas, and Eli, if I signed a document relinquishing all claims to Sterling Oaks and releasing the names of the other 39 from the original testamentary record. She said it like she was offering me something generous, like she was being reasonable. I looked at her standing there in the morning light, in her dead husband's house, on land that a legal document now said partially belonged to me, and I understood exactly what she was doing. She was trying to buy back her world with my children's futures, and she believed even now that I was still the woman who would accept that. The fire came on a Friday night. Not the main house. She was too careful for that, too aware that the house was now legally contested property. Instead, it was the old storage barn at the edge of the south field, where several families slept. I smelled the smoke before I heard the alarm. I was already running by the time the flames were visible, my lungs burning with cold air and terror. We pulled everyone out, all of them, by the grace of God and sheer desperation, but the message was unmistakable. Catherine Sterling was willing to escalate. She was willing to put bodies in danger to reclaim what she believed was hers, by the natural order of the world she had been raised in. 2 of the older men who lived in that barn had been at Sterling Oaks longer than I had. One of them, a man named Amos, sat in the dirt afterward with his hands on his knees, staring at what remained of the burning structure, and said nothing for a very long time. Then he looked at me and said, simply, quietly, "When do we leave, Sarah?" And that question landed on my chest like a stone dropped from a great height. I will tell you what true fear feels like. It is not loud. It does not announce itself with trembling hands or a racing heart. Not at first. True fear is the moment when you fully understand the size of what stands against you, and you feel your own smallness with absolute clarity. I was one woman. I had a legal document and the theoretical support of Union soldiers who were fighting a war 30 miles away and had no particular reason to prioritize my situation. Catherine had militia contacts, local judges who owed her favors, and 20 years of social architecture built to keep people like me exactly where she needed us. I sat in the kitchen in the hours before dawn, the document pressed flat on the stone table in front of me, and I counted everything I had against everything she had. It was not a comforting count. But then I thought about Amos sitting in the dirt. I thought about James, Thomas, and Eli sleeping 20 feet away. I thought about the 39 names written in Silas Sterling's careful, guilty handwriting. And I understood that my fear, however real, was not the largest thing in that room. The largest thing was the responsibility I had already accepted the moment I did not hand that document back. The revelation came not from Mr. Miller, and not from any soldier or official. It came from Silas Sterling's own hand. In the leather satchel that Mr. Miller had left with me was a second document, smaller, folded twice, sealed with black wax. I had kept it untouched for 9 days, afraid of what it might contain. On the 10th night, I finally broke the seal. It was a diary, not the full journal of his life, but a concentrated confession, 41 pages written in the months before his death, when he already knew the end was coming. In it, Silas described, in precise and devastating detail, every arrangement he had made with the abolitionists in the North, every financial transfer, every legal filing, every name. But what stopped my breath completely was a passage near the middle of the diary where he wrote about my sons. He described James as having his grandfather's stubbornness. He described Thomas as the most naturally intelligent person he had ever observed. He described Eli as having a laugh that sounded like something worth protecting. He had watched them. He had known them, truly known them, and had said nothing, had done nothing for years. The paper shook in my hands, not from fear this time, from something much harder to name. That diary changed everything I thought I understood about my situation, because hidden within those pages was something Catherine Sterling did not know existed, could not have known, because Silas had written it in the final weeks when she had stopped entering his room entirely. He had documented, in careful legal language coached by Mr. Miller, a full account of Catherine's financial mismanagement of Sterling Oaks going back 11 years. Debts hidden from creditors, transactions conducted under false pretenses, land titles that had been quietly, illegally renegotiated without proper authority. Silas had not simply left me a door, he had left me a fortress. The diary was not just a confession, it was a weapon, loaded and pointed directly at the legal foundations of everything Catherine Sterling believed she still controlled. I sat there in the kitchen with those 41 pages spread across the stone table and understood, for the first time, the full architecture of what Silas had constructed. He had been a coward in life, but in death, with the particular desperation of a man who knows he is running out of time, he had been extraordinarily thorough. And now, every secret in those pages belonged to me. The choice I faced in those final days before we left Sterling Oaks was the kind that does not appear in any book of moral philosophy, because books are written by people who had the luxury of thinking clearly in safe rooms, without militia riders appearing at the edge of their property at dusk. I had 2 paths. The first, take my 3 sons and leave immediately, under cover of darkness, using the Union soldier contact Mr. Miller had arranged. We would reach Illinois within 2 weeks. The legal case would proceed without me present, handled by attorneys in a courtroom far from Carolina. My boys would be safe. That word, safe, had a pull on me that I cannot fully describe to anyone who has not spent 20 years watching their children sleep in a room that did not belong to them. The second path meant staying 3 more days to organize the other 39. It meant coordinating a group that included elderly men, nursing mothers, and children under the age of 5. It meant moving 43 people through contested war territory, with Confederate militia actively looking for a reason. It meant gambling my sons' lives against a principle. And I sat with that choice until it stopped being a choice and became simply the truth of who I was. I chose the 39. I want to be honest with you about what that decision felt like, because I have heard it described since then as courage, and I think that word is too clean for what it actually was. It was not courage. It was the recognition that I could not look my sons in the eye. Not then, not ever, not for the rest of whatever life remained to me. If I had walked away from those 41 pages and the names written in them and saved only myself and my blood. James understood immediately. He was 19 and already carried himself like a man who had been thinking about justice since before he had the words for it. Thomas began quietly mapping the route north that same night, using knowledge he had gathered over years of moving between properties on errands. Eli, my youngest, my laughing boy, said nothing, but he went to find Amos and sat with him in the dark for an hour. When he came back, his face had changed in a way I recognized. He had crossed some interior threshold that a 14-year-old should not have to cross. And I felt the particular grief of a mother who knows she has asked her children to grow up in a single night. We left Sterling Oaks on a Sunday, 3 hours before dawn, in a silence so complete I could hear the individual footsteps of 43 people moving through wet grass. I had the document pressed against my body, wrapped in oilcloth and tied beneath my clothing. The diary was divided, half carried by James, half by Thomas, because I had decided that if something happened to one of us, the other half would still exist somewhere in the world. Catherine Sterling had posted 2 men at the main road. We did not take the main road. Thomas led us through the south field, along the river's edge, through a 1/4 mile of low marsh that soaked everyone to the knee and made the children cry from the cold until their mothers pressed them close and whispered them quiet. Amos walked directly behind me the entire way, steady and wordless, his presence at my back something I felt like warmth. When we reached the tree line where the Union scouts were waiting, I counted heads in the darkness. 43, every single one. The soldier in charge, a young man from Ohio who looked barely older than James, looked at our group and then looked at me and said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Ma'am, we need to move fast." And we moved. Catherine Sterling came after us. Not personally. She sent 4 militia riders who caught our trail 2 hours into the march and closed the distance faster than anyone had calculated. I heard the horses before the scouts did. The Union soldiers formed a rear position, and there was a confrontation at the edge of a tree line that I did not witness directly because I was 30 yards ahead with the children, moving forward, not stopping, not looking back, because stopping was the one thing we could not afford. I heard voices raised. I heard horses moving. I held Eli's hand so tightly that he made a small sound, and I loosened my grip without slowing my pace. What I learned afterward was that Mr. Miller had anticipated exactly this. He had filed an emergency injunction 2 days prior with a federal court in Charleston, and the Union soldiers carried copies of it. The militia riders had no legal standing to pursue us across the county line, and the young soldier from Ohio explained this to them with a patience that I am told was remarkable, given the circumstances. The riders turned back. We kept walking. By the time the sun rose over the flat Carolina fields behind us, Sterling Oaks was no longer visible. I did not turn around to look. I had already decided that I was finished looking backward. I am 62 years old now, and I live in Chicago, in a house with a front door that I chose myself. James is a practicing attorney. He argued his first case in a federal courtroom at the age of 27, and I sat in the gallery and kept my face very still because I had promised myself I would not cry in public, and I failed completely. Thomas runs a trading business with 2 partners, both of them men who were among the 39 who walked out of Sterling Oaks that Sunday morning in the dark and the cold. Eli teaches mathematics to children in a school 3 blocks from my house, and his laugh still sounds, as his father once wrote in a diary soaked in guilt, like something worth protecting. Sterling Oaks itself was seized by federal authority in 1865 and later sold. Catherine Sterling left Charleston, and I never heard her name again in any room I was standing in. What I know now that I did not know then is this: freedom is not given. It is not handed to you by a dying man's conscience or a lawyer's careful paperwork, though those things can open a door. Freedom is built slowly by the people who were told they had no right to it, working every single day in its direction. Silas Sterling gave me a weapon, but it was my sons and Amos and every person who walked through that marsh in the freezing dark who built everything that came after. That is the truth I carry. That is the weight of the oak. And I would carry it again, every last pound of it, without hesitation.